All right, well, hello again, GVC. This week we are continuing our discussion of the Redeemer of the world, who is Jesus, and particularly we're tackling the question why he had to become a human in order to accomplish our redemption. And so we pick up our discussion this week at question and answer 22 in the New City Catechism, which says this. Question, why must the Redeemer be truly human? Answer, that in human nature he might on our behalf perfectly obey the whole law and suffer the punishment for human sin, and also that he might sympathize with our weaknesses. All right, so why did Jesus have to become truly human? And our answer gives three reasons. First, so that he would fulfill or perfectly obey the whole law of God on our behalf. Second, that he would suffer the punishment for our sin on our behalf. And third, so that he might be able to sympathize, or so that he might sympathize with us in our weaknesses. I'll address that later, but let's work through all of those in order. So first, he had to come and do what we simply could not do. And we've spent a whole bunch of time talking about this, about the law of God and how we are utterly unable to perfectly obey that law and carry out God's standard of righteousness for us. And so Jesus had to come and do that on our behalf. If we could have done that, we would not have needed Jesus to come at all. And so, firstly, I guess, a human person had to fulfill the law in order to prove themselves to be righteous enough to be our substitute, right? So that we could benefit from that righteousness vicariously in the same way that we share in the original sin of Adam, right? The Apostle Paul puts it this way in Romans 5:19. He says, "For as by the one man's disobedience, the many were made sinners, so by the one man's obedience, the many will be made righteous." Right? And so Jesus, he had to prove himself to be perfectly righteous. So he had to fulfill the whole law of God as a human person. Because if any other human person, if you or I got the idea in our head that we would like to die on behalf of the sins of the world, it wouldn't accomplish anything, because all our death would accomplish is the just punishment for our own sins. We don't have a righteousness that's big enough to share or to spread to anyone else. We don't even have enough righteousness to cover our own selves. But Jesus became a human. He produced a righteousness that was big enough to cover all of us. So that's the first reason that he had to come and become a human. And secondly, he had to be a truly human in order to suffer the punishment for human sin. And this one, I think, this makes perfect sense to us, because we all have a desire for justice built into us, right? In order for justice to truly be done, only a human could pay the price for human sin, right? Imagine yourself, someone has done a terrible thing to you or to a family member, and you go to court, you go to the sentencing hearing, and the judge is just about to swing the gavel and pronounce the sentence on the offender. He's never going to see the light of day again. He's going to be locked up for the rest of his life in prison. And then some random person comes walking in off the street and approaches the judge and says, "I want to take this man's sentence on myself. I want to serve his sentence so that he can walk free." And the judge agrees, and the offender, this person who had done this terrible thing to you or your family, just walks out the door a free man. You would rightly feel that justice had not been done, even though the penalty, the sentence for the crime, was being paid in full by someone. Because it's not the right someone, justice, true justice, would have been undermined, right? And in the same way, human sin against God must be paid for by a human. Otherwise, true justice would not be satisfied. Okay? Sorry. All right, so that's the second reason that Jesus needs to become truly human. And then lastly, our answer says that Jesus had to be truly human that he might sympathize with our weaknesses. Now, this language comes straight out of Hebrews 4, verse 15, which says, "For we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, but one who in every respect has been tempted as we are, yet without sin." Now, why might that be important? Right? God is omniscient, right? Which means that he is all-knowing, right? There's nothing in the created world or anywhere else for that matter that God doesn't already know. And Jesus is God. So that means that Jesus didn't have to become a human in order to know what it's like for us as fallen humans to struggle against sin. He already knows that it's hard for us to fight against sin, right? So it seems that this aspect of his humanness is more for our benefit. And Hebrews, if God had found some other way to deal with sin, the thing about us as human beings, right? If God had found some other way to deal with sin without Jesus having to become a human, we would be tempted to think that he doesn't understand how hard it is for us to obey him. We would be wrong in that, but that's definitely where we go. And Hebrews 4 makes it clear that Jesus suffered temptation the same way that we do as a human, truly human, with human weaknesses. And yet he did what we could never do. He fulfilled the law of God perfectly. All right? So we are left first without excuses, right? We can't say that he doesn't understand what it's like because he's God. But secondly, now we can have confidence that he understands how difficult it is for us to obey him sometimes, right? We have a God who gets it, and he loves us anyway. He doesn't expect us to have an easy time fighting against sin. And so we don't have to be discouraged when we feel worn down and that it's difficult and we feel like we are failing. In fact, the writer of Hebrews goes on to say that, and this is in verse 16, the following verse, that because of this fact that Jesus came and suffered as a human being, that he was tempted the same way that we are, yet without sin, right? Because of that fact, we now can have confidence to draw near to the throne of grace that we may receive mercy and find grace to help in time of need. That's Hebrews 4:16. Okay, so we can thank God that he has worked out his plan for our redemption in exactly the way he did, because now we can have total assurance, we can have total peace, we can have total confidence, knowing that we are absolutely secure in our relationship with him because Jesus became like us to accomplish everything that we couldn't on our behalf. All right? So those are the three reasons why Jesus had to be truly human. And that's it for this week. I'll see you back here next week.